Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be tackling, a pretty tricky subject,
Yeah.
and that is the challenges of blinding in psychedelic studies.
Right.
So you sent over some really fascinating research on this, and it seems like figuring out how to, keep participants in the dark about whether they got the real deal or a placebo
Yeah.
is, well, it's a tough one, especially with those unmistakable psychedelic effects.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's incredibly tricky.
Yeah.
The subjective nature of these experiences makes it really hard to use traditional blinding methods that you might use in other drug trials.
Right. And speaking of that, you had mentioned some MDMA studies
Yeah.
that really highlight this blinding problem in a very concrete way.
Yeah, absolutely. So imagine you're in one of these studies, right? And even if you don't know, like consciously, if you receive the MDMA or a placebo, your body might be giving you some pretty strong hints. So researchers have observed that participants who actually got the MDMA, they report common side effects like fatigue, headaches, even sensitivity to cold, way more often
Wow.
than those who got the placebo.
So it's like their bodies are saying, hey, something's up,
Yeah, exactly.
even if their minds aren't quite there yet.
Exactly. It's like, whoa, what's going on here? And there's another physiological tell that's really interesting too, and that's body temperature. So over half of the participants who took MDMA experienced a noticeable temperature increase, like about 1 degree Celsius. And this wasn't seen at all in the placebo group.
Interesting.
So this suggests that even if we could somehow mask all the psychological effects, the body itself might give the game away.
It's almost like trying to create a placebo for a fireworks show.
Right.
The effects are just too obvious to completely hide.
Totally.
So where does this whole idea of functional selectivity come in?
Okay. Yeah.
It sounds pretty complex.
Yeah. It is complex, but I'll try to break it down. You see, the psychedelic experience is largely driven by what happens at these tiny little things called 5-HT2A receptors.
Okay.
So think of them like doorways on your brain cells.
Gotcha.
And when a psychedelic molecule comes along, it acts like a key, unlocking these receptors, and then it triggers this cascade of effects, and those effects are what lead to the unique experiences that people have.
So every psychedelic acts like a key to these receptor doorways.
Yes. But here's the catch. Not all keys work in the exact same way.
Okay.
So think of it like you have two keys that unlock the same door, but one key turns the lock smoothly, and the other one needs a good jiggle.
Okay.
Both keys ultimately open the door, but the way they do it differs slightly.
I see. So different psychedelics might activate the same receptor, but in slightly different ways.
Exactly.
Leading to variations in the subjective experience.
Precisely. And this is where functional selectivity comes in.
Okay.
So some psychedelics like LSD are like that key that needs a jiggle. They interact with the receptor in a very unique way that's distinct from how other substances do it, even those that target the same receptor.
That makes sense.
Right.
So even if you could find a placebo that mimicked some of the general physical effects of a psychedelic, those subtle differences
Yes.
in how it activates the receptor might still be noticeable to someone who's familiar with the real deal.
That's a key insight. It adds another layer of complexity to this whole challenge of blinding.
Yeah.
But wait, there's more.
Oh, boy.
We can't forget about the power of expectation.
Right.
And you actually included some really interesting research highlighting how set and setting,
Yes.
which is a person's mindset and their environment, can profoundly influence their psychedelic experience.
Yeah. It's really interesting research. And, it makes sense. If you're going into a psychedelic experience feeling anxious or skeptical,
Yeah.
you're probably more likely to have a tougher time than someone who's feeling, open and optimistic.
Absolutely. And the research that you shared found that people with those positive motivations and supportive environments, they tended to report more beneficial outcomes,
Yeah.
like increases in well-being and a sense of meaning.
Makes sense.
On the other hand, those with problematic motivations, or if they were in a difficult environment, often had more challenging experiences.
Right. So even if researchers could develop a perfect placebo one that mimics all the physical sensations and even some of the subjective effects,
Right.
someone's expectations could still unblind them,
Totally.
especially if they have previous experience with psychedelics.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's why researchers are starting to explore these alternative study designs, for example.
Okay.
Some of them are experimenting with active placebos,
Okay.
and they try to replicate some of the peripheral effects of psychedelics, things like increased heart rate or pupil dilation.
So like a psychedelic light placebo,
Yeah.
aiming to create some physical sensations of the drug without those mind-altering effects.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
I wonder what the downsides to that might be.
Well, finding a substance that can reliably produce those very specific physiological effects without veering into like a full-blown psychedelic experience,
Right.
it can be tricky.
Yeah.
Imagine accidentally stumbling upon a substance that's even more psychedelic
Oh,
than what you're trying to study.
that would throw a wrench in things.
Yeah, it would definitely complicate things.
Yeah, for sure. But what about focusing on participants who've never tried psychedelics before?
Right.
Wouldn't that minimize the risk of expectation bias?
That's a good question. And working with psychedelic naive participants can be helpful.
Yeah.
But it's not a foolproof solution.
Right.
Because even without direct experience, people develop preconceived notions about psychedelics,
Okay.
through cultural narratives, media portrayals, conversations with friends,
Right.
all of that stuff. So these expectations, they can still influence their experience even if they haven't personally taken a psychedelic substance.
It sounds like researchers are facing a real puzzle.
Yeah.
They're trying to untangle the effects of the drug itself from the influence of expectation.
Yes.
All while navigating the complexities of subjective experience and these subtle differences in receptor activation.
Yeah, and that complexity, that's precisely what makes this field of research so exciting.
Right.
It demands that we rethink our traditional approaches to studying drugs and embrace these more innovative solutions.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about the challenges of blinding in psychedelic studies, how even the body itself can sometimes reveal what someone has taken,
Right.
and how the intricacies of receptor activation and the power of expectation add further layers of complexity.
Totally.
Where do we go from here?
Well, there's so much more to explore.
Okay.
We need to dive deeper into those specific challenges that researchers face when working with different types of psychedelics, like LSD and MDMA,
Okay.
and how the unique properties of each substance demand tailored approaches to blinding and study design.
All right, this is all incredibly fascinating. So for our listeners, when we come back, we'll be exploring the unique challenges of blinding with different psychedelics like LSD and MDMA, and looking at how researchers are adapting their methods to tackle these complexities. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. I'm really eager to continue unpacking these fascinating challenges with you.
Yeah, me too.
As we delve deeper into specific substances, you'll see how these blinding hurdles become even more apparent.
Okay, let's start with LSD,
Okay.
a psychedelic known for its, well, mind-bending effects. What makes it so difficult to blind studies involving this particular substance?
Well, LSD is kind of notorious for its potent and truly unique subjective effects.
Right.
So remember that key unlock analogy we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Well, LSD's interaction with the 5-HT2A receptor, it's like that key that needs a very specific jiggle.
Uh-huh.
It triggers this cascade of effects that are just so difficult to replicate with other substances.
So you're talking about like the classic psychedelic experiences, visual distortions, a sense of unity with the universe, the whole shebang.
Exactly. And some researchers are trying to, create active placebos that might mimic certain physical sensations,
Right.
like changes in heart rate, but replicating the entire spectrum of LSD's subjective effects without actually giving someone LSD?
Yeah.
That's a tall order.
Like trying to create a placebo for a spiritual awakening?
Right.
Talk about challenge.
Totally. But, beyond those subjective effects,
Yeah.
there are other factors, too, that make blinding LSD studies particularly tricky.
Okay, what else?
Even tiny doses of LSD can produce noticeable psychoactive effects. So this means that creating a convincing placebo that really mirrors that whole experience is incredibly difficult, especially for participants who have any prior experience with psychedelics.
Makes sense. Even a subtle difference between the real deal and the placebo could be a dead giveaway.
Exactly. And we can't forget the role of individual variability factors, like someone's genetics, their personality, their past experiences. All of these things can influence how they respond to LSD.
Right.
So that makes it even more difficult to predict, what kind of experience a placebo would need to mimic.
So with LSD, researchers are dealing with a substance that produces this incredibly potent, complex, and highly individualized experience.
Right.
No wonder blinding is so challenging.
It's definitely a tough nut to crack.
I'm sure.
Now let's shift gears a little bit and consider MDMA,
Okay.
which presents its own unique set of blinding challenges.
Right. MDMA is known for fostering feelings of empathy connection,
Yes.
emotional openness. It's being studied for treating conditions like PTSD, social anxiety.
Yeah.
But how do researchers even begin to approach blinding when the drug's effects are so intertwined with interpersonal dynamics and those therapeutic interactions?
That's a key question with MDMA. The therapeutic context is just crucial
Yeah.
in shaping the entire experience. The
Yeah.
presence of therapists, the nature of that therapeutic relationship, even the specific instructions given to participants,
Yeah.
all of that can significantly influence how someone responds to the drug.
So blinding with MDMA goes beyond just masking the drug's effects.
Exactly.
It's about controlling for all those social and emotional variables that come into play during those therapy sessions.
You got it. Researchers are getting creative with their approaches.
Okay, how so?
Some of them are standardizing the therapeutic protocols to make sure there's consistency across all groups,
Okay.
regardless of whether they receive MDMA or the placebo. Others are meticulously training therapists to interact with both groups in very similar ways. And some are even using video recordings of the therapy sessions to analyze and assess for potential biases.
It seems like with MDMA, the line between the drug's effects and the therapeutic context, it just becomes so blurry. How do researchers tease apart what's due to the substance itself versus what's due to the supportive environment and those therapeutic interactions?
That's the million-dollar question. It highlights just how complex these studies are.
Yeah.
They're not simply about giving someone a pill and observing the effects.
Right.
They involve carefully controlling a whole web of interacting factors.
All right, so we've got LSD, which is difficult to blind because of its potent and unique subjective effects.
Yeah.
And then we have MDMA, which is challenging because its effects are just so entwined with that therapeutic process.
Yeah.
Each substance presents its own unique set of hurdles.
Exactly. And those hurdles, they highlight the need for incredibly rigorous study designs.
Right.
Careful selection of participants,
Ah.
and a really deep understanding of that interplay between pharmacology, psychology, and that therapeutic context.
Right, this is all incredibly fascinating. But what about other psychedelics?
Yeah.
We haven't talked much about compounds like DMT and 5-MeO-DMT,
Right.
which are known for inducing those incredibly powerful but short-lived mystical experiences.
Yes.
How do those characteristics play into the challenges of blinding?
That's a great question, and it brings us back to that concept of functional selectivity.
Okay.
You see both DMT and 5-MeO-DMT, which are classified as N-methyltryptamines, they also exhibit functional selectivity at the 5-HT2A receptor.
Hold on, remind me, what does functional selectivity mean in this context?
Sure. So it means that even though DMT and 5-MeO-DMT activate the same receptor as other psychedelics,
Right.
they do so in slightly different ways.
Yeah.
Remember our key analogy?
Yeah.
Imagine that each of these substances is like a key that opens the same door. But each key turns the lock with a slightly different motion.
Okay, I'm starting to picture it. So even though these substances all ultimately activate the same receptor,
Yeah.
the nuances in how they do so can create very distinct subjective experiences.
Exactly. And when it comes to DMT and 5-MeO-DMT, those subtle differences in activation lead to incredibly intense but short-lived experiences,
Yeah.
often described as mystical or transcendental, and that brings its own set of challenges for blinding.
I can imagine trying to find a placebo that could convincingly replicate a brief but incredibly profound mystical experience.
Yeah.
Seems like a daunting task.
You're right. It's like trying to capture lightning in a bottle. And because of these unique challenges, researchers who are studying these short-acting psychedelics,
Okay.
they're placing increasing emphasis on subjective reporting. So they're gathering very detailed accounts of people's experiences through questionnaires, interviews, other self-report measures.
So while perfectly blinding studies with these substances might be difficult, if not impossible,
Right.
researchers can still gain valuable insights by focusing on how people describe and interpret their experiences,
Yeah.
both during and after the drug's effects. It's almost like a different way of understanding the impact.
That's a great way to put it. And this shift towards emphasizing subjective reporting, it allows researchers to really explore the therapeutic potential of these substances, even in the absence of perfect blinding. By meticulously documenting, changes in mood, perception, well-being, they can start to understand how these compounds might help alleviate suffering and contribute to human flourishing.
It's like we're moving from a purely objective, measure everything approach to research towards a more holistic understanding of the human experience.
Yeah.
Acknowledging that that subjective experience plays a crucial role.
That's a profound observation, and I think it reflects this broader shift that's happening in science, this growing recognition that to truly understand the human mind, it requires us to go beyond simply measuring brain activity and to embrace the richness and complexity of that subjective experience.
Wow, this has been an incredibly insightful conversation.
Yeah.
We've covered so much ground, from the inherent challenges of blinding in psychedelic research
Yeah.
to the unique hurdles posed by specific substances like LSD and MDMA.
Right.
We've even touched on how these challenges are leading to new ways of thinking about research methods.
Totally.
With an increasing emphasis on understanding that subjective experience, it's been a deep dive in the truest sense.
And we're not done yet. There's still so much more to explore, especially when it comes to, those innovative study designs that researchers are developing to address these blinding challenges. We'll delve into those when we come back.
Welcome back. We've been on quite the journey so far, exploring this whole intricate world of blinding in psychedelic research. And, it's clear that this is a field where those traditional methods just don't quite cut it.
Yeah. What really fascinates me is how these challenges are forcing researchers to get really creative. It's like they're having to invent entirely new tools to study these unique substances.
Yeah, you had mentioned some innovative study designs earlier, the ones researchers are using to kind of tackle these blinding hurdles.
Right.
Can you give us a little glimpse into what those look like?
Absolutely. One approach that's gaining traction is using active placebos, like we talked about before.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more to it than just finding something that mimics a few physical effects.
Okay, so remind me, what's the basic idea behind an active placebo, and how does it help with this blinding problem?
Sure. So the goal of an active placebo is to create an experience that's believable enough to keep participants guessing, did they get the actual psychedelic or not?
Okay.
And this might involve using substances that produce some mild physical changes, like slight changes in heart rate or blood pressure, but without triggering those full-blown psychedelic effects.
So it's like creating a decoy experience that shares some superficial similarities
Exactly.
with the real deal.
Yeah.
But wouldn't that still leave room for those experienced users to kind of spot the difference?
You're right. It's not a foolproof solution, and that's why researchers are combining active placebos with other strategies.
Oh, okay, Blake.
Well, one of those is focusing on very specific populations.
Mm.
So, for example, some studies only recruit participants who have never, ever used psychedelics before.
Okay.
So that minimizes the chance that they would recognize those subtle differences between the real drug and the active placebo.
That makes sense. But even people who haven't tried psychedelics, they've probably heard stories, they've seen portrayals in the media. Wouldn't that still influence their expectations?
Of course, it's impossible to completely erase those cultural influences.
Right.
And that's why researchers also pay a lot of attention to set and setting.
Uh-huh.
They carefully craft the environment. They provide really detailed instructions to manage expectations and minimize those potential biases.
So it's almost like they're trying to create this controlled environment where the experience is more likely to be shaped by the substance itself rather than by, pre-existing beliefs or expectations.
Exactly. And this is where that therapeutic context becomes so important, particularly with substances like MDMA that are being studied in a therapeutic setting.
Right.
So researchers are standardizing those protocols, carefully training therapists to interact with both the placebo and active groups in very similar ways. And some are even using video recordings of the therapy sessions to analyze and control for potential biases.
It sounds like researchers are becoming incredibly sophisticated in how they design these studies.
Yeah.
Recognizing that it's not just about masking the drug's effects.
Right.
It's also about managing those expectations, controlling the environment, standardizing the therapeutic approach. It's like a whole new level of scientific rigor.
It is, and it's incredibly exciting to witness this evolution in research methods as scientists continue to explore the therapeutic potential of psychedelics.
Yeah.
These innovative approaches, they're essential for separating the true effects of the substances from the influence of expectation and other external factors.
This has been a truly mind-expanding journey. We started by unraveling the inherent challenges of blinding in psychedelic research.
Yeah.
Then dove into those specific hurdles posed by different substances like LSD and MDMA.
Right.
And now we've gotten a glimpse into these cutting-edge methods that researchers are developing to tackle these complexities.
Yeah.
It's clear that this field is constantly evolving, pushing the boundaries of scientific inquiry.
And ultimately, this rigorous pursuit of knowledge is paving the way for a deeper understanding of the human mind and the potential of these substances to alleviate suffering and promote well-being.
Absolutely. Well, a huge thank you to our expert for guiding us through this fascinating exploration of the challenges and innovations in psychedelic research, and to all of you, our listeners, for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, stay curious, and we'll see you next time.